Hello, welcome to Collaboration, Effective Behaviors, Skills, and Tools. My name is Nadine Ryan-Bannerman, and I'll be your facilitator for this presentation. We will be covering the things that help us collaborate more effectively and some of the things that can get in the way and what you can do about those things. When we say collaboration, we mean we're working to achieve an outcome that meets the interests of both or all of the parties involved. And it requires effective, positive behaviors and skills. Skills like listening for understanding, listening really well to understand someone's point of view, questioning for understanding, supporting others' efforts to do well, building on suggestions and ideas, using both and language and differing constructively, and figuring out how to improve the relationship. So we'll be talking about all of these as we go through. A couple of key points about questions. When we don't understand someone's point of view or feel we need more information, we are naturally inclined to ask questions. Unfortunately, if the idea is new or controversial, or if the atmosphere is a little charged, any questions starting with why might provoke some defensiveness. So the suggestion is to ask good open-ended questions using what, how, what if, and allow people to have some time to think through as much information as they need to understand the idea. Once we feel like we've gotten enough information to have a solid basis of shared understanding, that's when we might employ our closed-ended questions and ask, are we ready to move on? If the answer is no, then maybe we need to clarify a little bit more. So if you think of your meeting, project, or discussion as kind of a diamond, in the beginning, we're opening things up, we're exploring alternatives, we're trying to get everyone to understand it the same way. And then towards the end of the meeting, we're coming to some decisions and moving on. In collaboration, we want to ask questions to understand, to reframe an issue, or to brainstorm some new ideas. We'd like to come at it ideally from a place of curiosity. It's helpful to have some handy phrases and questions available for those times when you haven't had a chance to prepare. What's your most important priority? What's the impact to you? Help me understand the thinking behind this. What are some ways to work through this? These questions can all help us discuss more congenially what it is we're trying to collaborate on. Other effective collaboration behaviors include participating, striving for consensus, reflecting and learning from experience, and maybe having as part of your meeting process, what did we do well and what would we like to do differently next meeting? One of the things that can help us or get in our way is our style of collaboration. So you know that when you collaborate, we're going to bring into the room a number of very different types of personalities, and the same with our style in collaborating, conflict, and negotiating. Most of us have a default style that we're most comfortable with, but we might be able to use several, and it is actually beneficial to use more than one style and to understand each of the other styles. You may have come across the different conflict, collaboration, and negotiating styles and strategies that Thomas and Kilman developed. It's probably the most frequently used indicator. And I'm going to go through these so that we can understand a little bit more about our own styles and how to work with styles that are maybe not as easy for us. So as I'm going through this, give some thought to what do you think is your default style? What's the one you use the most? And then if that's not working in whatever situation, which one do you go to next? And finally, give some thought to which one is most difficult for you. So the accommodate style is the person who would really like for things to be in a good relationship and outcomes to be good for people. And they may be more likely to accommodate others in a collaboration. This can be very helpful in terms of resolving log jams, but it may be a challenge if the person gives up too much. For analyze avoid, Kilman and Thomas called this the avoid style. What I have discovered in my years of working with this indicator and with adults in the workplace is that we all have to deal with conflict, and we all do every day. We all deal with collaboration, negotiation, but people in this group would like some time to analyze the issues, the facts and data at hand, and what they'd like to avoid is intense emotions or disagreements. So collaborate is a style I think a lot of us aspire to, and this style is willing to spend the time and effort investing in a fair consultative process to get the best solution for both parties. The compete style will fight for what they think is right and have a strong sense of urgency to resolve issues. The driver here is to get a timely, clear solution. So if you would like compete to consider a different proposal, help them get there by suggesting how long you think it will take to discuss an alternative proposal and when the decision might be able to be made. Compromise is probably the most frequently used style. This is where we look for ways to meet needs, try for a win-win, but we're more pragmatic. What can we do in the time we have remaining? Would an 80-20 solution work? So those are the styles and strategies. And then if you're thinking about which is your go-to style, let's look at it the way Thomas and Kilman have mapped it out here. So for example, collaborate, they see as being high on meeting both their own needs and the other party's needs. Compromise is kind of in the middle, and compromise can work with all of these groups. Compete is more driven to urgency by the need to make a decision. Analyze, avoid would prefer not to get involved in a disagreement, but will certainly collaborate, and especially if they have the opportunity to analyze the situation. And accommodate is high on meeting the other party's needs, and perhaps not as high on their own. One of the things that's important to know about styles is as we go through the stages of group and team development, and this is Bruce Tuckman's model, and what it posits is that when we're first in a group or a team, we are in a forming stage. We're kind of figuring out who's who, what role do I have, how do I participate most effectively, how do I fit in? And in this stage, we tend to be more polite. So we may not get to any disagreements for a while. But once we do, and every team or group is going to get to a place where they have differences, we get into the storming stage. And here's how we have to figure out how to disagree effectively. If we don't get out of the storming stage, we may not get to be as productive and efficient as we could be. So managing our differences, one of the things we have to agree to is how are we going to work together? So for example, if we disagree, are we always going to keep that discussion respectful and respectfully disagree? And that's our norm, and we will call each other on that if we are deviating from the norm. So once we've established some norms and kind of a culture around our group, how do we best solve the problems we're working on? This is where we get to the best performance. So in collaboration, we need influencing skills, and that's because often we're collaborating with peers. So what do we mean by influence? The interpersonal behaviors that we use to have a positive impact on another party's choices. And notice that's the act of producing an effect without the exertion of force. Why does influence matter so much in collaboration? Well, it matters because increasingly we're in an environment where technological, social, and political change is pretty much continuous. We have team members who may be remote or hybrid, and in collaboration, being able to influence respectfully rather than push is essential. This is challenging sometimes for people because push feels like it's going to be more time effective, but often it's not, because pushing in collaboration may backfire. One of the ways you might like to influence people is through preparing your key messages that you want to get across ahead of time. So a couple of short key points that help people understand your perspective, the core, most important information, and most importantly, showing that you can take into account the perspective of the people who will be hearing the message. Consider the following when you're thinking about your key messages. What do people need to know? What do they need to understand? What do they need to believe? And what action are you asking for? So here's a kind of a template for how to do this. What is my key request, consideration, or changed? What leads me in the understand portion to think that this is important? What's my rationale? What do I believe? Why do I think this is valuable? And why do I think it's beneficial to all? And now specifically, what would I like you to do? Would you agree with me? Would you help me action it, taking it forward? What else do we need to do? So I hope that tool can be helpful to you. It's called the KUBA tool, just like the acronym shows. So One of the things that can help us and hinder us in collaboration is if we have shared personal values, it tends to encourage and enhance collaboration. However, values are personal and deeply felt, and we may find that we have values differences. So the challenge here is that values differences are very closely related to our emotions, and they can trigger emotional responses and unhelpful behaviors. So under stress, we may want to push or push back, yet the evidence that we have shows that pushing is rarely helpful. You'll see in this chart that collaborating generates true commitment, but pushing generates resistance and compliance rather than true commitment. Values disagreements and what I call ego or identity concerns can definitely trigger emotions. What this diagram shows here is a person whose feelings layer has overwhelmed their rational layer, and perhaps they've now said or done the thing they would really rather have preferred not to. This can happen very quickly, in seconds in fact, and so we need to understand this process and how to deal with it. One of the things that can help us deal with this kind of a response is to be prepared for it ahead of time. So I do know we all have triggers that can make us upset. For most of us, we can handle 1, 2, maybe 3 triggers, but if it's been one of those days and we've had 4 or more, then that increases the chances that we may not respond the way we would choose to, rather we would more react. So what are the triggers? I divide them into a couple different categories. Physical triggers like fatigue, hunger, or pain. Values and emotions triggers. Disrespect is almost a universal values trigger for people. Differences in work ethic, quality versus timeliness. If you feel disrespected or your status is threatened, all of those things can trigger us. And certain situations do trigger many people. A crisis, for example, sometimes even boredom, uncertainty, perceived or real threats, or someone else losing their temper can trigger those around them. So take a moment for yourself and think about, when was the last time you felt really like you were losing your temper? What happened immediately before? What were the triggers for you? And if it was a values trigger, which value? Was it fairness? Was it something else? Think about that, because this way you'll know for next time, oh my goodness, okay, I've been triggered 2 or 3 different things today. I need to really be attentive to how I respond to things in this next meeting. So I hope that's helpful in terms of identifying your triggers and doing the best you can to be prepared not to overreact and to respond in a calm way. Sometimes we talk about controlling our emotions. Really, it's more a question of getting the emotional brain and the logical brain to have some agreement. So when we are feeling triggered, that feeling of being upset, what it means is that the emotional part of our brain has triggered the fight, flight, or freeze response. And in that moment, we may not be responding logically, respectfully, professionally. So how do we deal with this? Well, the first step for yourself is to notice, what is the emotion that I'm feeling, and pay attention to that. Just notice it. Try to do that before you act or react. One of the ways to get yourself back into the logical brain is to name the emotion that you're feeling. Okay, what is it? Am I frustrated? Am I disappointed? What's going on here? If you can, calming strategies are to take a break and go outside for a walk. Sometimes those can't happen because leaving the meeting might escalate the situation. So maybe quiet reflection to yourself. What were the triggers that led up to here? And how do I choose a productive course of action? A key point here on personal attacks. Attacking a person, saying, you never do this or it's your fault, is considered to be an error in logic. Try not to defend yourself in a personal attack, because it only gets the argument going around the person. Instead, have a stock phrase ready to say something like, regardless, we need to focus on the task we need to get done. Here's a tool that might be helpful to remember if you find yourself in a situation where you're starting to feel a little heated. Visualize a stop sign. So think stop calmly to yourself. Take 3 deep breaths at least to try and keep your heart rate and blood pressure at a more normal level. Think about the triggers and how to address the situation. Name the emotion. If that's not working to de-escalate, a break might be advisable. 10 minutes or a couple days, whatever is needed in the situation. When you're taking the break, organize what you want to say. This is where you might prepare some key messages. And then proceed to complete the conversation if both parties are calm and able to follow up. But be sure to follow up and not just drop it. So hopefully this stop technique is helpful to people. Another model that might be helpful is the SCARF model. This comes from the neuroscience research in a book by David Rock called Your Brain at Work. And we sometimes don't know what values have been violated in order for us to figure out how to get back on track. So he's categorized the most common causes of values disagreements. And think about it this way: to calm emotions, put on a scarf. And the values that we may have unintentionally trodden on are status. You know, everybody needs some validation and wants to feel like they're a contributing, respected member of a group. So if there's been a disagreement or anything like that, that may have negatively affected people. Certainty, many of us find uncertainty upsetting, so we know we can't have certainty in today's environment, but it is distressing to some people, so we need to look for how do we deal with that. With autonomy, most of us want to make as many of our own decisions as possible, and sometimes we can't. The constraints in the situation, the governance model, whatever it may be, may not allow us to have the autonomy we would wish to have. Relatedness is important. We're wired to be social, even if we're more on the introverted side, and we all want to be part of a community or a group. So if someone feels excluded, this can show up in the relatedness value. And fairness, as I mentioned earlier, across numerous cultures is a shared value. People want to be treated fairly. They want to ensure there's a fair process. They want others to be treated fairly. What's challenging is that sometimes we interpret fairness differently. So during a conflict or a change, something's happened to provoke an upset, find a way to say some affirming statements. Something like, I believe we're both looking for a good solution. Means we're related, we're together in this, we're trying to find and do the right thing. I mentioned earlier that it's helpful to have stock questions and phrases available, things that are your go-to. So here are a few that I found effective. See if any of these resonate for you. Tell me more about your perspective, and then allowing the person to think, giving them a moment to collect their thoughts, and then really listening. And here's where the skill of listening for understanding comes in, that no matter how much you disagree, you're willing to put your own opinions aside and really listen to this other person's perspective. Help me understand the situation. What have you tried already? I'll often ask that if it's evident someone's been trying to solve a problem, so we don't go down that same path again. What were the results? When someone is really anxious, this question: what is best case, most likely, and worst case? So this is where we're in a situation of uncertainty. So thinking through these helps us plan our strategies. So what is the worst case and how do we mitigate for that? What is the best case and how likely is that to happen? So if we prepared for all of these cases, then we start to engage our thinking brain again, and it's very calming. What is the most important thing to you? How do we prioritize these things? How can I help you with this situation? Here's my all-purpose way to disagree respectfully. I agree with you up to this point. It's right here where I'm having trouble understanding. So that may work for some of you. Some other questions, a few more. I thought I put them all on the same page. And then regardless, we have to complete this task by the deadline. And that might be what you might say if it sounds like, you know, the environment is deteriorating. So let's refocus on the work. When we are in disagreement, which is going to happen, some things that might be helpful are, first of all, to emphasize where we have agreed in the past and the areas of agreement with this current issue. It reminds us that we're in an ongoing working relationship and we have been able to agree previously, and we will agree again in the future. We just need to work through this. Ensure your communication is respectful, including tone and body language. I'm not saying this is easy, especially if you're pretty upset. Do what you can to stay calm and respectful. Moods are catching, for better or for worse, and the moods of leaders are especially catching. So keeping the tone and body language as neutral as possible is very helpful for everyone. If you're working on a disagreement, look for the facts, data, and objective standards so that we're not battling out opinions. We're actually referencing the facts and data we need to make decisions. Another helpful strategy can be to check assumptions. Sometimes people have missed the first part of it, or they may have missed a meeting previously, or they may have made some assumptions they don't even realize they've made. So it might be a useful strategy to say, okay, let's check some of our basic assumptions and make sure we're all on the same page before we go down this road. So that may help. One strategy that for sure is not helpful is to blame. There's no point in blaming. It just engages defensive response, and then people want to stop collaborating. At this point, we want to figure out, what do we do to go forward successfully? From the Crucial Conversations model, I thought this might be helpful to some people. The what and the how. Share your facts. I noticed. Tell your story. It made me think. And ask for the other's path. What is your take on that? And the idea is that we involve ourselves in a dialogue, a two-way dialogue. Talk tentatively. Perhaps, in my opinion, it comes across as more engaging than I think we should. Encourage testing. Would love to hear your thoughts on this. So perhaps that's another model that will help. Bridging language is another skill that may help in collaboration, and it's a way of showing commonalities between people and a willingness to move forward. So I had this same issue last year, and I've seen that there are ways to work it out. I think I understand your dilemma. Let's see what we can come up with that could be helpful strategies. I would really appreciate if we could do this. It sounds like you're saying you cannot see the value. What if we took some time, or what if we took a break? So all of those things can help us get that moment for reflection, take a deep breath, and figure out how to move on productively. Some language issues. Language is so important in collaboration and to prevent unnecessary conflict. We're going to have conflicts over issues. We just don't want it to be the kind of destructive conflict. So try saying, instead of "I disagree with you," here's where I follow the reasoning. Here's where I have some trouble, as I mentioned earlier. It's your fault. There are a number of contributing factors here. I've been in a number of discussions where saying that has been very helpful. And if I'm at fault, I will say there are a number of contributing factors here, including that I misunderstood the original intent, right? Taking some accountability. But, or however, tend to erase what you just said. What people find themselves doing is saying, I get that you have a different point of view, but I see it this way. And that again sets us up in opposition. Try saying "and" instead. This is what we mean by both and language. I understand your rationale, and I see that. Another really common phrase when we're disagreeing is, I'm sorry, but. And try to say instead, what are some alternatives we can think of so that we can reach our goals? Another tool that might be useful to us is to think not in terms of disagreement, but more in terms of a continuum of agreement, disagreement. So this tool envisions that you would go around the room and ask people, where are you at with this? So perhaps you really like the idea. I like it. Or maybe you don't want to stop the rest of the group, but you don't love the idea. Or maybe you agree, but you have reservations. So then that gives us an opportunity to talk through, what issues, if mitigated, would increase my level of agreement. And sometimes we can't agree, but we will agree to support the decision of the group outside the room. With blocking and vetoing, that's rarely a tool available in collaboration with peers, and it is an extreme strategy. So if it is used, it may have some consequences of damage to the relationship. So that one needs to be handled with care. The work from the Gottman Institute is often helpful in groups. although they study couples, they do sometimes work with teams as well. And they analyze relationships in a fairly transactional way, and we can learn a lot from it. So for example, they will look at a couple discussing something or maybe arguing over something, and they observe that during the course of the day or the course of working with someone, we make bids to each other, and a bid is an attempt to keep the relationship good. So for example, I can say to my office mate, "Hey Joe, I'm going for a coffee. Can I get you one?" That's my bid to keep our relationship good. Joe can say, "Yeah, thanks, that would be great." He's accepting my bid. Or he can say, "No thanks, I just got myself one, but thanks for asking." That's still accepting my bid. Or he can say, "What, don't you think I can get my own coffee?" So that's rejecting my bid with hostility. Or he can ignore me, which is the worst. So when you get a bid, you either turn toward the person or you turn away. And sometimes we turn away almost unknowingly. We're irritated, we've got something else on our minds, whatever that might be. But it turns out that if we have a relationship where we have at least 5 positive to every 1 negative interaction, that can help us get through a conflict more easily. And interesting that the Gottmans did a study on conduct disordered children, and before they worked with the kids, they observed them in their environment, and they found that on average these kids were experiencing 13 negative to every 1 positive interaction with adults in their lives. So knowing that gives us a strategy to say, hey, can we do more positive interactions here? And I've certainly used this in the workplace where we don't realize how little we say thank you and show appreciation for other people's work. And it's very powerful, and it's one of our most underutilized tools. And it can just be a private thank you. It doesn't have to be anything, big or showy. In fact, sometimes people would prefer it not be big or showy. So think about that in terms of bids for connection. Is there some way, can we go for a coffee? Is there some way we can build more of those positive relationships? On the other side, the worst things that you can do in a relationship, the Gottmans call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling. And if a lot of those are present, it tends to break down the relationship. So what do we do about these things? The Gottmans recommend that we be alert to when we're criticizing, and instead be as gentle and careful as we can about the person and focus on the behavior or the action, and might even consider, depending how charged the environment is, not giving feedback about something that has happened, instead giving what Marshall Goldsmith, the executive coach, calls feed forward. I would really appreciate in the future if we ran our presentations by each other before we went out in public. So where you make the suggestion for what you want to see in the future, and then that helps take down the criticism level and also the defensiveness level. If it seems like people are feeling defensive, the recommendation here is to take responsibility if you have some to take. So like what I had said earlier, it might be, look, I understand this is difficult, and I think I made it more difficult by doing X. Let's try this. Try not to let contempt come into any conversation. It's one of the worst things for a relationship. And as I mentioned earlier, looking for things to appreciate about the work we've done, about the fact that we are all trying to do good things and have a positive impact. And stonewalling, where someone absolutely ignores someone else, is very challenging. It is one of the most difficult strategies. And so what we have to work on here is what the Gottmans call physiological self-soothing. How do we keep ourselves calm so that we don't react to this stonewalling with an overreaction? So that might be the 4 breaths, it might be the stop method, it might be going for a walk, it might be phoning a friend, whatever that is that we need to do to feel a bit better in the situation. So we've gone through quite a bit in this presentation. So a summary here. We looked at the purpose of collaboration, the skills that you need, the different styles in collaboration. We looked at influence. We looked at a technique for key messages. We looked at values and their impact on collaboration. a little bit on emotional responses and managing them, listening to understand, bridging language, gradients of agreement, disagreeing constructively, and bids and responses to improve relationships. None of these things are easy to do, and they take practice and time, and it seems to me that in the area of collaboration, it's one of those things we can continue to build our skills for as long as we are collaborating. So I hope some of these have been helpful. It would be helpful if you could answer at least the first two parts of this question. In collaboration, what key tools, behaviors, or skills would you like to use more frequently? Or is there anything you might like to stop doing? Or is there something that you're doing now that's working that you want to continue doing? I hope this question helps people think through all the different things we covered in this presentation. Thank you for viewing this recording. If you have questions about it or about points that I covered or have some feedback, I would be so pleased to hear those. Here's a couple of emails from me. The UCalgary one is probably the easiest one to use. Please send me your questions and feedback, and whatever you got from this presentation or think would be helpful to include next time, please let me know. That would be very helpful. Thanks again.